Hey everybody, it's Master Gallengeist here, bringing you my review for the book The Forever Knight by John Marco. And I enjoyed this book. Thing is, I got into this author with his series, which was called the Inhuman Trilogy, not to be confused with like Marvel's Inhumans. But that got changed to the Bronze Knight Trilogy. And I didn't know that he had made another book, and I recently saw it, and I'm like, oh, all right, cool, because I enjoyed the trilogy in high school, and it was like the first one was The Eyes of God, Devil's Armor, and then The Sword of Angels. Now, with that, you're thinking, are these some like religious kind of things? It mainly has, it does involve like trying to figure out religion, but it's not overtly religious. It's more kind of like swords and sorcery. I would kind of term it more. Uh, it's kind of like Lord of the Rings, but not really because there's elf-like creatures in it, but most of them are dead, but their spirits are still around. It's really kind of weird. You mainly more deal with humans in more kind of medieval kind of settings, and the only you do see some other kind of weird creatures, but you don't really get into like crazy kind of other kind of races like orcs and dwarves and all of that. It's mainly kind of more of a nitty gritty kind of thing, mixed up with certain kind of elements of magic. Almost, interestingly enough, think of it more as kind of skewing towards Game of Thrones to a degree of how its mystical elements are kind of incorporated, where it's kind of in the background for a little bit and then it kind of jumps a little bit forward, but you still kind of focus more on the human stuff going on. Now, it does get into like political intrigue and stuff like that, but it's not on that level of like what was going on with Game of Thrones. I like the kind of conclusion and stuff that we get in this book and the stuff that they do with these characters more than what's been going on with what happened with Game of Thrones, especially in the show. So, this is a continuation off of that kind of thing, and the way this book is structured, because as you can see, it's kind of a smaller book. It's not even 400 pages, which is kind of different because the other ones were not vastly, but bigger than that one. And this one follows more along the lines of a medieval kind of story, centering on like a knight errant. Think Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, kind of Beowulf kind of style. Now, granted, Beowulf is more of an epic poem that's kind of longer, but that kind of structure and that kind of style. Now, I enjoyed this author's kind of work within the trilogy, and then kind of coming back, it was kind of a little bit different. Now, granted, I have just come off like Dune and whatnot, so even though I wasn't as into that one as I wanted to be, I was like, it did give me a certain kind of appreciation for the prose of how it was written. This one, I just had a little bit of trouble of how the prose kind of made everything flow, because sometimes it was just kind of like, okay, I kind of get what's going on here, but its flow needed a little bit more work. Now, granted, there is a lot of time between the last book in the series and this one, so kind of being out of it for a while from this kind of world and these characters does kind of make sense that kind of disconnect could potentially be in there. Granted, it could just be me, but this follows the Bronze Knight, the Forever Knight, Lucan of Lyria, and of course, this has spoilers for what had occurred in the other series. So, if you kind of want to follow that series, go for it, because it follows him and his kind of cast of characters and everything. But this is just me kind of rambling to give you that kind of. This is talking about spoilers of that and what's going on here. All right, so to get into the meat, at the end of that trilogy, Lucan, who was like one of the royal chargers, the Bronze Knight of Lyria, he had pretty much betrayed his king Aquila because he fell in love with Queen Cassandra, who Aquila eventually married. But she then got stricken with cancer, and they tried to find some mystical ways to kind of detail that. Well, Lucan tried to go find this place, and it, of course, had this kind of Jador, which is supposedly linked up with this magical race, like mystical beings. It's like, what the hell's going on? And we find out that there's all these people that have different kind of ailments, and this one woman, Minikin, has this kind of repertoire with these otherworldly beings, the Akarai, and they of course are on the spiritual plane only, but are able to kind of like help people. So say that you're blind. Well, this Akari would be able to like show you things in your mind and actually pretty much make it so that way you can see. If you've got some kind of ailment of like not having an arm, say they could like infuse itself into a piece of armor and you've got a prosthesis. Now, granted, it is then done and helped with the Akarai, and you kind of get the picture on that. It's to help with all these different kind of people. Well, he brought it back to her, and she was pretty much kept alive, but the thing was, nobody could really look at her. However, Lucan was then, of course, kicked out, and, of course, did some kind of mercenary work, was brought back in, and he looked at her because they pretty much thought that the whole thing was bullshit, but there were some kind of extenuating circumstances why someone else was able to actually look at her, and then she died, started all this kind of war stuff, and eventually he has to deal with like a rogue Akarai, the Devil's Armor, and he has to go find this Sword of Angels, the only thing to defeat it, so that way he has his own Akarai. And he gets this Sword of Angels, thereby pretty much making it so that way he lives forever. And at the end of it, he is able to beat the Devil's Armor and beat everybody involved with that, and he becomes like the protector of Jador and the Inhumans, who have their Akari, because there's only so many Akari that can like be used, so a lot of people still come in and try and get help for their ailments, but Jador also helps those people as well. Well, at the end, we see that his friend that had helped him, Gilwen, is with White Eye, the leader of Jador, and they kind of do their own kind of stuff, but Lucan really loved Cassandra and wants to pretty much die, but can't. So he's got this love-hate relationship with his Akari, Malator. And they have a contentious relationship throughout this book because Malator knows a lot of things, but doesn't reveal them to Lucan until certain times. And he's, of course, going out fighting giant snakes that are called Ras and being like, trying to do this kind of hunter stuff and putting himself into mortal danger, but then he just says to the Akari to either heal him or let him die. And since this is the only way that the Akari can, like, interact with the world, it's kind of put him on that kind of weird kind of thing where he wants to die but doesn't want to die. So we see that one of the people within like Grimhold, the place where the Inhumans are, Cricket, she kind of has memory issues and kind of wants to learn more about herself. Gilwen, noticing that Lucan has pretty much, he comes in, acts kind of grumpy, and then goes back out pretty much periodically. It's like, why don't you go and try and be like a knight errant and kind of, me and my wife are going to have a baby, go out, screw around for a little bit, and then come back and help us raise our kid. And the thing is, even though that sounds really horrendous, it's a really kind of heartfelt kind of thing for Gilwen to like suggest. And Lucan cares very deeply about Gilwen and White Eye because of all their shared relationship and history. Well, he's like, fine, I'll do it. And he decides to take Cricket as his squire, who's a 14-year-old girl. She's trying to figure out her memories and everything that's going on. It's like, all right, cool. So they kind of start going up. They meet up with this one dude from another country of Ganjor. And he pretty much gives them the kind of lowdown of this area called the Bitter Kingdoms, because she comes from the country of Akair, and she's trying to find this place that's like a waterfall to kind of like jog her memory. Well, they're trying to go through that. They go through this town of Arad, and this giant dude named Wrestler pretty much tries to take and rape Cricket, but Lucan's like, screw that noise, and tries to like wrestle him, but the dude breaks his neck, and of course he doesn't die, but he comes very fucking close because he didn't have this sword on him when he did this. But luckily Cricket was able to enlist the help of this dude Maurelius, and he's pretty much like, listen, let me take to this dude and try to help out. This is where it kind of falls into the kind of knight-errant territory. He's like, fine, we'll go there. And he gets introduced to Anton Fallon, who is this merchant dude who built up this city of Isoan. And he's done it with, like, all these kind of, like, spice merchant routes. So he's like, listen, there's this monster that is pretty much trying to kill me. Can you help me with this? He's got all these mercenaries. He's got all this stuff going on. He acts like the playboy kind of Tony Stark kind of thing, except kind of worse. We see that he's got a tattoo on his forehead, and like, what the fuck's going on with this? So Lucan, Cricket, and Morelli's kind of go out to kind of reconnoiter what's going on. They get to this kind of place where these tombs, and we find this giant kind of crazy ass beast that's like made up of like skins and bones and shit. And Lucan tries to like fight it and kill it, but when he tries to slash at it, the sword doesn't really do much. It doesn't do much to it, and his like arm catches on fire to a degree, and he gets injured from it. But he gets kind of healed by Malator. He's like, listen, you gotta kind of fucking think what you're going on with this. It's like, alright, there's something more with this than meets the eye. They kind of go back to Anton and figure out that he's got him and this dude from Akire, Emperor Dariel. And the thing is, he wanted a legion of like the undead because we've been hearing whispers of this. And he decided to sell them Mamiya powder, which is just ground up mummies. You snort it and it makes you pretty much invincible. So Lucan's like, fine, I'll try and figure out what's going on with this. And kind of goes off with Cricket, and Cricket's like, we gotta find this waterfall. Now, my biggest kind of issue with this is it falls into the annoying kind of teen trope of, okay, we do need to get your memory back, and that is definitely a good objective to have. However, we then learn that, like, the place that she's from and where this, like, waterfall would reside is Akire, led by a pretty much cannibalistic crazy man who made his people snort ground up dead people to become pretty much the legion of, like, the lost, like, undead soldiers. Or pretty much soldiers that are almost dead. It's like, oh, Jesus. They kind of go up and they see that there's no animals around and everything like that because Akire pretty much got screwed over by a lot of people in the Bitter Kingdoms to the point where they ate everything in the country and then became cannibals and started eating people. Because we see the dude is like nuts. The biggest kind of issue is that Dariel is not really the big villain to a degree. There's a lot of different villains involved in this. Like Anton's kind of villainous because he grave robbed and fucking ground up mummies and shit. Dariel is enslaving people and going crazy and being like, I'm gonna make an empire. I just need to snort more mummies or get this monster thing. Okay. And then Wrestler is the better of all the antagonists in the book, in this book, in my opinion, because he revels in his shit, but he doesn't get enough. He doesn't get enough screen time for my taste. It's like, okay, you got all these people, and I think that it would have been kind of better if it had been worked into potentially like one character. It's like you got the basis for like, okay, these are some good stuff. It was fleshed out, but it's like less than 400 pages, so they don't really flesh them out that much to make it to be like, okay, well, Anton's got some stuff going on. Dariel's like kind of thin, and then Wrestler is pretty much the biggest kind of obstacle for Lucan. So they kind of go up there. Cricket's kind of like pissed off. We see all this kind of like crazy shit. Soldier pretty much killing themselves at Dariel's request. We see slaves and people just in abject, horrendous situations. It's nasty. And that's one thing I kind of want to say is pretty well for the book. We see horrendous stuff, but it doesn't say that this stuff is good. You know what I mean? They are like, these people are enslaved. This dude's a rapist and a pedophile, and this dude's a crazy cannibal that wants to control a monster, and this dude went and took mummies, ground them up, and had people snort them. It's the one kind of trend that happens is that like some books or some TV shows revel in that kind of dark shit and you're like, yeah, this is the world and all that shit. This one shows that this is part of the world, but there are others that will fight to like make those things better, like Lucan and the rest of the people that joined him in the defense of Isowan later on in the book. So in order to get out, Dariel's like, listen, you go and get me that monster, alright? And Luca's like, alright, fine, you fucking weirdo. And they kind of bolt off and try and figure out what's going on. They do get to the tombs to kind of figure out what's working. And evidently, the dude had pretty much snorted up his like ancestor emperor dude, and they find out that the monster is named Krezel, and that it comes from the world of Gahorath, and Gahorath, something like that, and that it's a kind of dead world, kind of more like a hellish place. And the thing is, there are other death worlds we had learned in the book. Cassandra's got her death world, Death Orchard and shit. Lucan, of course, wants to go there, and we see that Malator is trying to train Lucan to be something. And it's like, all right, cool. They get to Isowan, and they're trying to figure out what to do. They want to. Lucan's like, fine, I'll go try and kill the monster again. So that way we can kind of like get rid of this shit, and then we gotta like fight Diariel Man. Cricket's like, this is stupid. I'm gonna go to the falls. Why? Because we have to have something bad happen to me, so that way you can actually do something because the plot demands it. Fuck. Now, granted, at first I wasn't gonna go that route and say that, but it kind of does. She goes to the falls. Wrestler was pretty much let out to try and do whatever he wanted to follow him. He rapes her, and she's pretty much bloodied and beaten. Because Lucan tries to fight the monster, figures out, it's like, hey, what the fuck's going on with you? It's like, screw you. Fucking kills his horse, and then he's able to go back, and he goes to Anton, is like, something going on with that thing. I need to figure this out. And it's like, Cricket left. Fuck! So he gets, like, the speediest horse that he gets his bond with, goes up there, and figures out Cricket. She got to the falls, and she learned her name and what was going on. Actually, her sister's name was Cricket, but she accidentally dropped her, and she drowned, and there was a baby, and her name was Lacey, and then she kind of just dies in Lucan's arms, and he wants vengeance, and Malator gives it to him by healing him, because he had lost an eye, and he gets pretty much that eye back, and his youth back. Is like, I'm gonna do this shit. And we also learned that Lucan doesn't have a soul, because that's how Krezel kind of hunts. It's like, what? Huh? You things are like soul beings? What the fuck's going on here? It makes it kind of more complicated, because the plot demands that something happens at the end for this to occur. It's like, okay. Now, granted, when I say the plot demands, it's not as bad as certain things, because I enjoy the characters and I enjoy the world, but it's getting to a level that it's like not working for me, to the point where I'm like, okay, I enjoyed this book, it just needed to be a little bit better in its execution. And that's pretty much how I'm going to kind of shake out with this. So he pretty much gets amped up. We see that, like, of course, the other kind of countries around Diariel have been screwed over. We get to Drin, and we see this one dude, of course, bringing up his father, the king had died, and the rest are kind of amping up with him. And he's like, hey, follow me to Isowan. We're going to kick this motherfucker's ass. Granted, that is extreme paraphrasing, but you get the gist, because this dude's like, I'm gonna motherfucking fuck this dude up. And they pretty much gather the Drenmen, which is about like 200 or so people, and it follows the typical kind of route of like, okay, he's decided to do this. His 3 wise men council are as well, because they had been sworn to their king. We also then see that Lucan is able to get Krezel to be like, hey, listen, stay here in your cave thing, and I'm going to bring whoever's going to take you to whatever's get you back. All right, cool. Because the monster just wants to go back home and everything, even though it's kind of like freaky ass as shit. So they pretty much get to Isowan. Lucan is able to run into a group of Zurans. Anton is also a Zuran, but they're like the Bogati. They're like horsemen that are pretty badass and everything. He gets into this kind of like brotherly kind of thing with this other dude. He gets to Isowan. He sees the one dude that he had run into from Ganjor. His sons were pretty much killed, and he pretty much is on a vengeance path. They start bringing everybody together. They do their war council. We get to the battle scene, which is not bad. Still kind of shortish. I do like these battle scenes and these fight scenes better than what I got in Dune. So if you're into that, this kind of works, because Lucan kind of goes on a bloody rampage because this dude can get hurt, but Malator has put him into like prime beefy position. So we see them kind of like going through, and we get some definitely moral quandaries going on, because Diariel sends out the slaves first, and Lucan and the rest try and like get them on their side, and they are able to do it, though they do have to kill some of them, but they get them kind of back behind their own lines to be able to get them like situated. They do eventually help them and join them, But then we start getting to the Legion of the Lost, like they're soulless, so you have to pretty much chop or destroy their head off, almost zombie style, but it's more like whites, or if you're into like Resident Evil, more of the kind of Resident Evil 4 ones, 4 through 6. Zombies that can use rudimentary tools and stuff like that. Now, granted, these don't like mutate. This is a creature whose soul's been taken, and it'll go and it'll do all this shit, no matter what you do to it, except if you take out its head. Take out the operating system, you can't do shit. And it's just, he does a good job of explaining how, like, not explaining, but like telling you and showing you what's going on during this battle scene, as Lucan is pretty much waiting for Dariel to go and get his trap, because Lucan told him about what's going on with the monster, and he makes a beeline there, but Lucan's able to get there before, and he's like, alright, this is where we're getting into the end game here, guys. He's able to pretty much take Dariel and shows the monster, like, this is what you want. And then, just because of pretty much telling him that, the tattoo went to Dariel, and he drug him to Gahorth because he needed his master. Well, because the mummy got like taken and round up and shit like that. So it's like, alright, cool. And he only did this because he's like, I'm gonna take down Wrestler. So he then goes outside, sees that it had taken out, because Dariel was gone, the rest of the Legion pretty much took itself out. Like, it just knocked down. Because 3 of them had pretty much accompanied them. So then we get to the point where Lucan has been changed up, so he's able to kind of just leave his sword, but he's able. This one goes a little bit shorter than I would have liked. I would have liked to see a little bit more of a drawn out battle between him and Wrestler as they're kind of like wrestling together, but he's able to pretty much break the dude's neck and be like, "Fuck you, man," and it was pretty effective. It's like, alright, fuck that dude. And we learn through Malitor that, like, the reason he agreed to do this is that even though Lucan doesn't have a soul, with what Malitor has been able to do, he is able to walk between different worlds now. He's like a world walker now. So even though he doesn't have a soul and can't join Cassandra in the afterlife, he can still go to her death world and still visit her and talk to her, because he says, like, hey, you could have gone into Gahoreth too, just by walking yourself, instead of like Krezel needing to take someone in, because I assume it follows essential vampire rules where if you're from that dimension, you can take people into that dimension. You know what I mean? I guess it's not really as adequately explained as I would like. Like, I don't need everything just like laid out completely, even though I like that sometimes. But there's like some vagueness to it that I wish had been gone into a little bit more, but it's like, oh, that's cool for Lucan, so he can go and do all these things, and then he gets ready to go back to Jidoor to be with his friends and everything and continue on with what's going on. So it does conclude the overall story, which was nice, and leaves it open for any kind of other possibilities the author would like to go on for Lucan, because there's a lot of different stuff. I mean, now he's essentially an interdimensional walker, and can do all these different kind of things, and I'm like, ooh, that's a lot of interesting kind of setup and everything, and we could potentially see somebody else being charged with that at some point if he wants to be done eventually with it. But I do like that Lucan, I did empathize with him with, he had done a lot of things in his life, he had a lot of regrets, and trying to come to terms with those regrets and battle through and get better and try and have a better kind of view on life. Now granted, I wish that it was more of like he was going for justice for Cricket rather than revenge, because it could have consumed him more, and I'm glad that it didn't. So he was a very interesting character to follow. I just wish that the prose worked and flowed a little bit better for me. Now granted, I might have to like read it again at some point, because it had been years since I had read, of course, the other trilogy, and see if reading through that trilogy again and then coming to this and seeing how that kind of lines up. But I overall really enjoyed this book. If you're into fantasy and medieval kind of stuff, this will definitely work for you. If you don't like pretty much violence and all the things that I've pretty much talked about, monsters and scary stuff and all that, I understand that this will not be for you. But if you can tolerate that and you're into seeing that kind of interplay and what can go on with that, I would definitely recommend this book. I really enjoyed this series, and I would definitely recommend it to a lot of people if you're into fantasy and all that. Now, granted, you might not like it, and that's perfectly fine. Some people like things, some people don't. It's cool. I ain't got no beef with that. So, yeah. So those are my thoughts on the book. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. Also like and subscribe, and I hope you have a good day.